Yeah.
we shall proceed
Okay.
as planned. Okay, Naz, thank you so much for joining us tonight on our second connection session on grief management in the time of COVID-19. In the previous session, we had covered shock and denial, and we were joined by Ms. Odwa Gogo, who is a clinical psychologist in Queenstown, South Africa. And today we are covering pain and guilt, but from a different angle. You are a toxic relationship coach. Can you just introduce yourself very briefly and tell us what exactly it is that you do?
Okay, right. Okay, so my name's Nazia. I am a toxic relationship recovery coach, and I empower women to overcome trauma and redefine themselves and empower themselves when they've left a toxic relationship. So I usually find that a lot of my clients, when they come to me, they don't have self-esteem, they have broken self-worth, they don't really have much. They don't align themselves to an empowered woman. So I just realign them to get to that point where they can feel that they kind of evaluate their self-worth and who they are, and just to build their confidence again.
Sure. That is a whole lot, and it's so necessary, right? Especially if one is going to be embarking in a journey of healing. That sense of self-worth needs to be quite stable, yeah?
Absolutely, yeah. And we lose self-worth in so many different ways. But when it comes to toxic relationships, a lot of people don't actually realize that when we come out from these relationships, they affect us in such a way that they're not like normal relationships. You can come out really feeling broken, and it's almost like feeling that you have lost someone in the physical sense. You know, when you have a death in the family, or it can feel very similar, because these people that are toxic can really engrave such negativity that it's a process that you've really got to go through.
Sure. I had actually was thinking about it, and I'm so glad that you bring in that sense of loss when one is either in a toxic relationship or is making their way out of one. And I wanted to just say that that's the angle that we're taking this stage of grief today. Looking at it from the realm of relationships, romantic and otherwise, because any type of relationship can be toxic, right? Whether it's romantic, whether it's family, whether it's friends, it can all really fall into that bracket. So now, when it comes to pain and guilt as the stage that we're dealing with, how can that manifest when one is in a toxic relationship or coming out of a toxic relationship?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because I tend to find with a lot of the women that I speak to, guilt is a big role that they play in the relationship. And like you said, it doesn't have to be a romantic relationship. It can be with a parent, it can be with a co-worker, it can be with family, with friends, it can be with anybody. And usually what happens is the situation is manipulated, where the person is felt inclined to almost be submissive, and the abuser, who I'm going to call the abuser, controls the situation in a way that they make the victim feel that they are constantly carrying guilt if they don't behave a certain way, if they don't act a certain way, if they don't give in to their needs in a certain way. So even when you're in a relationship, you're constantly carrying that guilt. And I almost call it, it's like carrying a bag of potatoes on your shoulders, you know. It really affects your health and your well-being. And then when you're leaving a toxic relationship, the guilt is usually, well, that person, how are they going to survive without me? But they need me to enable them to lead a fulfilling life, because they've been molded to carry that guilt to keep them in that relationship. So it manifests in so many ways, but it's usually, unfortunately, in a cohesive control environment that it manifests.
Yeah. And I guess in as much as there's a lot of ways of it to manifest, there's also a lot of ways in which one can engage in coping mechanisms when they identify that, you know, that physical manifestation of it, that kind of thought pattern, negative thought pattern that comes in. But can you give us at least 2 examples of each, and how then one would go about coping or tackling it from a coping mechanism perspective?
Yeah, so for example, when you're in a relationship, one of the ways that you can deal with it is to firstly reflect, internalize how you feel about yourself. It's usually very closely linked to self-worth. When you don't feel that you are deserving of more, then you allow people just to put the weight on you of more problems or whatever the situations may be. But when you can just take a step back and think, one of the examples that I use quite a lot, if you had a friend, what advice would you give to your friend in that situation? If you had a co-worker that came to you and said, I'm in this situation and I'm really finding it toxic, or I'm really struggling with this relationship, what advice would you give to that friend? And it usually would be to think about yourself and put your needs first. Do you really need to be carrying the guilt of this person? I mean, how would it be if for one day, for example, you chose not to and said to this person, well, I'm sorry, but today I've got X amount of things going on, and can we deal with that issue at a later date, or can you deal with that issue?
Sure.
And a lot of women realize that when they do that and they deflect back what's been put on them, 9 times out of 10, that person will sometimes absorb that and say, okay, that's fine, I'll do that. Or if they're toxic, they'll make them feel guilty. But one of the ways is just to be able to stand up and find your voice, and just to be able to voice that concern and say, well, hang on a second, try it for a day. Is this working for you? Or if it's not, and when you're leaving a relationship, how we can integrate that into making that person feel that they're more fulfilled is by just being able to observe and realize that we are deserving of more. As women, we tend to take on so much responsibility of the world, and just to sometimes think, well, I need to put my needs first, I need to put myself first. And then just being able to put yourself in the situation where you think, well, I'm not going to absorb your energy for today, I'm going to just focus on me. Take some meditation, some shopping, write in your journal, read a book. Just something that can give you that time to be able to almost put like a barrier up just for your me time, just where you can actually be able to just absorb what's going on, be able to cope and deflect it back again.
Yeah, I just noticed that we have a lady that just joined us, Bongiwe. Welcome, Bongiwe. Thank you for joining us. We are just out of talking about how you know, the pain and the guilt can manifest when one is either in a toxic relationship or coming out of one, and some of the coping mechanisms that we can employ when we find ourselves experiencing that pain and guilt. Just some of the things that might start going on in our minds that I'd like for you, Nas, to just highlight a little bit for us in terms of how to cope with them, especially when I see a scenario where one has come out of a toxic relationship and is now stuck with the feelings of the hurt of having almost allowed themselves to go through that, the hurt of the time lost while having gone through that. You know, there's a lot of loss that happens when a relationship ends. You know, and so the pain that comes with that, with the realization of having lost so much, how then we deal with these things. So one of the things that I find is prominent is self-blame. You know, that sense of I got myself into this, and how could I let it go on for so long, however long it had gone on for? And you know, who does this make me? And then flowing into mistrust of self. You know, not trusting yourself. So how would you advise that we tackle self-blame and mistrust of self?
Yeah, and this does, it's a very common trait, that when you come into a relationship, you feel like you, oh, have I lost you? Are you still there?
I'm still here.
Yeah, great. So when we come out of a relationship, it's very much a feeling of feeling very small. You've invested your time, you've invested your money, you've invested your feelings, your emotions. It could be 2 months, it could be 2 years, it could be 25 years. You could have a marriage together, you could have a business together, children, and when you walk away, you almost feel that your world has completely kind of fallen to pieces, because this situation is what you just feel so attached to. And what a lot of women don't realize is that when you walk away, you do not have to be the superwoman. You do not have to put on the crown of I am coping with everything, because inside we need to allow ourselves time to be able to grieve the process.
Yeah.
And that realization, when I present that, is almost like a light bulb going off. Can you excuse me 1 second? My cat is meowing and she's saying, she's not going to stop.
No problem. Let's take to the cat real quick.
Sorry.
We have fun. We have so much fun in these.
She always happens to hide in a corner when I'm doing a just somewhere. So yeah, a lot of people realize that it's actually okay to say to yourself, I am allowed to grieve this process. I'm allowed to have some time to heal.
Naz,
yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Something's going on with your audio. There's a lot of crackling going on there.
Yeah, I don't seem to have anything on my desk. I'm picking that up. I'm not sure what it was. I assumed it was coming from your side. I assumed it might be coming from your side, but let me just check. Yeah.
Okay, I think I'm going to ask our participants to mute their mics, just in case somebody's mic is not muted and the sound is transferring from there. There we go. Okay.
It almost sounded like a packet of crisp.
I know. I was like, never again. Okay, as you were.
So yeah, when women come into these relationships, it's almost like a process. You feel the guilt, you feel the blame, you feel the self-doubt, you feel the internal turmoil of, like you said, why did I allow myself to fall into that situation? Why was I so blind? How could I not have seen? Why was I so stupid? Is something that I hear so often. You know, and that feeling of, I mean, I know because I was there. I was in a toxic relationship. I was in a toxic marriage for 8 years. And when I came out, I was very broken. I was very small. I was very submissive. And it was very much a case of, why did I allow that to happen? And what we've just got to allow is to say to ourselves, it's okay, because usually it's not an overnight process that someone just came in and abused you in a certain way. It's normally a gradual erosion over time. And it's in different forms of manipulative behavior that this person eventually got you to the point of being a confident, bubbly, you know, independent person, to this person who's almost quivering like a mouse, you know, who's got no. It's a gradual process. So allow yourself to, A, to grieve, and B, to say, I didn't allow this to happen. This happened to me.
Yeah.
I didn't give someone the green light to say, you can treat me in a certain way, but this person is to blame for their behavior. In a healthy relationship, that wouldn't usually happen to that extent, because people have empathy. In relationships, you would not mistreat your partner to a certain point. But in toxic relationships, unfortunately, the empathy gene is usually missing. So that will be very manipulative in their behavior, and we almost become victims of that person's behavior. So allow yourself to accept that it wasn't your fault, and to almost then move on to, and this is very difficult for a lot of people, but it's a process that if we follow, it can help us to move forward, to allow yourself to forgive what happened and to release that. And how we can do that is just to say to ourselves, it happened. It wasn't something that I planned or hoped to happen. It happened to me. But from here, I have a choice to decide, how am I going to move forward? Am I going to let this consume me? Or from today, from this moment, from this very second, am I going to choose to step into my power and allow myself to forgive myself for whatever happened to me and move forward with possibility, what I can do?
Yeah, I almost want to ask, because it's one of those easier said than done situations, isn't it? Because you want to think that you know what you would say, but we often don't. We often find ourselves in this dark place in our lives, and we have encouraged others multiple times before in similar circumstances, and yet when we find ourselves in those moments, it's hard to find that narrative again. It's hard to hear our own voice talking to ourselves and, you know, encouraging ourselves out of it. So what are, if I can put you on a spot here for a second, a mantra or two that one can then say, and this is by way of something that they can think on, something that they can, if you like, meditate on regarding themselves. And is that even a good idea?